Hi everyone. As you can clearly see, I'm sick again. This semester, right? Oh man. Okay, so luckily this is just a quick video that I know I said I'd post for you guys. So we talked before in that previous video about 2 weeks ago, maybe, the class discussion video on the ethnography chapters 1 through 3. So this is the part 2 of that. So this is just a very brief discussion of a few things, kind of going over chapters 4 through 7. Like I said before in the previous video. So first of all, if you haven't watched the other one, watch it. There's gonna be a lot more information in that one. So I go over the actual instructions and requirements for the paper, and I briefly discuss the first couple of chapters in the book. So I'm not going to repeat that whole thing in this video. This one's going to be a lot shorter. So go back and watch that one if you haven't watched it. But I'll just kind of reiterate a couple points in the first one. So I do go over the very specific instructions for the paper. So if you're curious about that, there is a document in our course shell on files. It's like helpful writing tips and ethnography paper instructions or something. That file or that document's been in our Canvas shell since the first week of class, so that's there for you. In the first video, I talk about I go over those instructions in detail, but they are written out for you as well. So I'm not gonna, like I said, I'm not gonna repeat all that in this video. However, I do want to point out that in that first video, when I talked about those first couple of chapters, it wasn't, and I posted some questions, and so also those questions and the questions in this video are on in a file on a document in files in our course shell. Hi, baby. So, but like I mentioned before, those questions and the questions I'm going to talk about in a second, they're not questions you have to specifically answer. They're really just if you are reading the ethnography and you're thinking, okay, I need to summarize this, just a couple different ways I talked about in the previous video, how you might want to summarize that ethnography when you write your paper. The questions that I posed in that first video and the questions I'm going to show you in just a second are just kind of to get your mind thinking about it as you're reading. Like, okay, she posted some questions, I'm going to start reading the ethnography, I have those questions in my mind, so as I'm reading the ethnography, I can oh yeah, she pointed that out. That's probably something I want to pay attention to. Or you can look at the questions that I've posted, and if you've already read the ethnography, then you can compare oh yes, I pulled that important point out as I was reading. Oh, she's asking that question about okay, yes, I remember that from chapter 5. So it's just a way to get you to think. Please do not, I know I mentioned this in the previous video, do not submit these questions. These are just for you. In fact, if you're watching this video, you don't even have to look at those questions. They're only as just a helpful tool for you to use if you might need a little extra help in terms of what you think you're supposed to be pulling out of the ethnography. Okay, so I did this before on the previous one. I had it listed on my little board. I told you guys I like to try to use my board as often as I can. So I do have some more questions here, and we'll talk about these briefly. But like I said, the questions that I posted like this in the first video, and then they're all on a single document in our course shell. So you're not trying to write this down right here, because this is just so I can use this in the discussion. But this is actually in a Word document for you to use as a reference if you want to. Okay, so we kind of briefly talked about in the previous video some of the main things I wanted you to pull out from chapters 1 through 3. And then this is chapters 4 through 7. And there's a little bit of overlap. Like if you've already started reading, you realize there's a lot of, they might talk about sex roles in hunting in a couple chapters, or they might talk about parenting and childcare in a couple different chapters. So there's going to be some overlap. It's not. But there are things kind of distinct for each chapter as well. So like I said before, if you haven't started reading the ethnography, there's still time. Do not wait to the last minute. Although if you do end up waiting kind of to the last minute, it is not a difficult assignment, but just don't do that, because I don't want to get a bunch of you guys panicking that you haven't read it, and that's why I've tried to kind of space these discussions out with you guys. Okay, so here we have these questions. So just like before, I have four questions with some points. So the first one, is there a sexual division of labor regarding hunting and gathering? you guys should know the answer to this. They talk about this in multiple chapters. And then, but so kind of think about that. What about age? Are there age divisions of labor? Like, do young people or adolescents do something different from adults? You know, maybe yes, maybe no. And then more importantly, how do the Bod Tech explain these divisions? Like, how do they say, like, oh yes, we do have these divisions based on sex or age, and this is why? Like, that's important. Number 2, how do the Bod Tech understand or explain conception and pregnancy? So this is a really interesting topic that they go into a lot of detail about. So usually in the past, when students have written their summaries, a lot of them kind of focus on this topic, which is totally fine. So just kind of, you know, as you're reading it, you'll probably, if you've already read it, you're like, oh, I know exactly what she's talking about. It's just very interesting. There's a lot of points they make about this in the book. Number 3, how is the Bod Tech experience of childbirth similar or different from your own culture? So think about the experience of childbirth, you know, being pregnant, you know, giving birth, the aftercare, like that whole kind of experience for the female. What is it like? Like if I asked you, like, this is why I wish we could do this in the class, like have an actual class discussion, because, you know, there's so much that we don't really think about. Like, what's the process in our own culture? Like, maybe there's a baby shower. Then maybe on the day of, you have a plan of driving to the hospital. Maybe you don't. Maybe you, because this is definitely a new thing, even in our culture, staying at home, delivering at home, having maybe a midwife. We're definitely seeing an increase in that. So how is that? How is what they do? I'm not going to give you guys the answers, but how is what they do, which they talk about in the book, how is that similar or different? Maybe a little bit of both to what we kind of do in general in our culture. So kind of think about that. And then the last one, not really giving, as I wipe away part of it. What is the blood sacrifice? So I'm not going to give you guys any more detail. This is just a really interesting thing they talk about in this book. Okay, so like I said, don't worry about copying these down right now. There's a document that has these questions and the ones from the previous video. It's all there for you. And like I said before, do not take these questions and write the answers out to this. That's not what I want you to do. Please watch the previous video. I go into a lot more detail, but I'll kind of say it again. These are just for you to kind of have a tool to use as you're reading. It's only just kind of as a guide. Like I said, the summaries that I'm expecting for you, typically I see, because you guys are all reading the same book and you're summarizing the same book, I'm going to be getting a lot of papers that are really similar, and that's totally fine. And everyone has their own way of summarizing. If you just take each chapter and summarize each chapter in a paragraph, you basically have, you know, the whole essay right there, or the whole paper right there. A little bit more, obviously, like intro, conclusion. So you can totally just do that, one paragraph per chapter, summarize each chapter in a very general sense, as long as it's clear that you read the ethnography, that's fine. Or what I see some students do is they kind of pick a theme, like sex or gender roles or childcare, and they kind of talk about maybe a couple of more themes of the book throughout each chapter. So it's really how you want to do it. As long as at the end it's obvious, whichever kind of style you use, that you have read each chapter, that's all I'm really looking for. And so like I said, those questions that I'm posing are really just a way to kind of get your mind thinking about what I am hoping you are pulling out of the reading. So as you're reading, you're like, there's so much, because there's a lot of information. I could post 10 questions, 20 questions. There's a lot of information. And so these are, like I said, these are just a tool for you to understand, like, okay, these are some important things I know she wants me to kind of pull out of this reading, and I can kind of hit on those as I summarize in my paper. Okay, so that's it for this one. Like I said, if you haven't watched the first one, please watch it. It's a little longer. It's like 20-something minutes. I go into more detail about the actual instructions of the paper. But like I said, those are also in a document on our course shell, the very specific instructions, also some helpful writing tips. And if you have any questions about any of this, you know, please reach out, and I'll see you guys on the next video.